everyone, welcome to Movement and Me, an initiative that is designed for budding artists across the world who wish to pursue their career in art. I'm your host Niharika, and on this show you will hear artists talk about their lives and the choices they had to make in pursuit of arts. We will also get to use some tips and key learnings from the lives of these artists, along with a detailed discussion on their areas of interest. So quickly hop onto a journey into the world of arts along with us. Now here with us we have today Miss Anita Vijay. Miss Anita Vijay is a Bharatanatyam dancer with more than 20 years of experience. She's performed on various occasions and toured across the world, but felt that her performances were leaving her with more questions and very few answers. Miss Anita started Abhinayam Dance, also known as Abhinayam Dance Network, an initiative in hopes to empower Indian classical dancers so that they may find strength in attaining their passion on their own terms. She also provides a space for artists across the world to share their views, thoughts, and experiences with budding artists and future dancers. Hello, Anita. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for agreeing to doing this with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love that we met on Instagram and that you reached out a few weeks ago. It's so nice with the pandemic that we can make such new connections and really quickly now meet up. So thanks so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. I'm actually thankful to you because you kind of do a lot of work which I am closely associated with as well. We're gonna get to that, but before we reach the such further ahead in the conversation, I'm gonna quickly ask you about your journey through dance. I've seen that you have 20 plus years of experience. Could you tell us a little bit about where you got started? What was it that inspired you to move in the first place? And who was actually your inspiration behind all of this?
Well, I guess growing up in North America, my mother was my first dance teacher. It was a way where she wanted to introduce movement to my life. Music is a big part of our family's life. And at the age of 2, we started dancing. And then a trip back to Sri Lanka actually initiated my first, namaskaram with my cousin, my older cousin, who was in her teens. And she was the only one in our family that had started dancing. The previous generation of, mums, I guess, were never allowed to dance. And it was a big deal that my cousin was dancing. And so my mom was really excited that we got to connect. And that started my journey. Growing up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, though, in a very small community, we're just reaching about 1 million now in Winnipeg of people. So it's a very small city. There is a South Asian community, really connected, and there was a dance school there. So shortly after my trip back to Sri Lanka, my mom signed me up, and that started me off. And at the age of 16, I sort of started to gauge that I wanted to be on stage. How and when and all of that just wasn't really making sense to me at the time. So the only thing to me that was really heavily connected was Bharatanatyam. So I started teaching at that age as well. And that really, I think, sort of made me realize, even as a teacher, why we're teaching the way we are. That was probably the first set of questions I had. I think, systemically going into a studio and doing your technique work and then piece work, it just wasn't something I thought about too much. I just showed up, did my thing, and then left to go home like any other typical teenager. But when you, I think, start teaching the smallest of kids, 5, 6, 7 years old, that's a lot of responsibility for a 16-year-old. It's really not easy to teach a very young child. And questions about religion and technique even was something that I couldn't find enough information on. I think Indian classical dance, the way it survived, has survived in a very beautiful manner, but we have such a long way to go to be someone that can teach on a regularity in terms of technique, in terms of safety even. And so that's when it started. At 18, 19, I started touring and going to different communities of dancers. And that was the biggest experience because, I come from such a small community to begin with. You tend to think that that's the way things go, however you're used to, and then you sort of meet up everyone else and you realize that's not even close to what, is going on around the world. So, um, being a North American and going to other South Asian spaces in North America or even in India or in Europe was a little difficult because as a North American, you're considered not authentic enough, which started to give me this identity crisis at such an early age. And was I missing something because I grew up in Canada? Was I good enough to be on stage? And then on that front, you also have society politics that comes with South Asian communities. And then, I also was a North American that I wanted to get into the North American side of performing as well. But I wanted to do it as a South Asian dancer, as a Bharatanatyam dancer. And what we see now in Hollywood spaces and film and across North America with Bollywood, that didn't exist when I was 18 and 19. That's about a good 10 years ago. That's crazy, 10, 15 years ago now. And to see it so alive and so easily accessed is wonderful. Yet the classical side of things is still non-representative in that space. And so going to auditions and explaining that you don't have modern dance experience, but you have, Bharatanatyam experience, the North American side views that as a cultural exchange, not really something that's professional, because we're not really set up in a professional manner. We were, but it was in a very traditional sense. We still don't have a regulatory body that oversees exams or the safety of students and teachers. So, that was the challenge I faced, and that was a battle ongoing. So we started to sort of form legitimacy with one another in spaces, and we started to take, I started to go to these auditions and I would bring binders of stuff talking about Indian classical dance. I didn't know how else to educate these, theater directors. When I got my first audition, it was a singing piece. I still don't talk about it because it was so traumatizing because I could sing Carnatic, but I couldn't sing Western. And so I had to learn all of this really quickly and go do it. And it was a lot of fun. I think it definitely um, gave me an idea of what I wanted to do on stage. But it was such a long journey just to get that first audition. And that's when I started to think, there's so much we can do collectively. Why hasn't that happened? And there's so many myths that we need to dispel. There's a lot of things we need to now progress forward, I think, in the art space, not just in Bharatanatyam, but in all eight classical styles. And that started my journey on Kathak and Odissi as well. When I started to take, I'm not as as trained as I am in Bharatanatyam and as experienced, but a few years in Kathak and now starting Odissi in the last few years has given me a lot more appreciation for how much farther we do need to go. But that just means how much more work I want to do. It gives me more of a purpose and sort of a direction to go to. So that's been my journey so far.
I think that's quite a lot of information and very interesting things that you bring up as points to discuss. So I'm going to get started with the first thing that piqued my attention, and I think it's important to have a conversation on these matters.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about the politics that you were talking about that exists in South Asian communities. I think it's important for people who are non, I would say, not based outside of India, to understand what this politics is all about and uh, what kind of struggles you went through and how did you find opportunities to navigate with all of that while you would, also dealing with it in firsthand.
hmm So, like most South Asian communities, we face cost issues, religious differences, colorism, the body shape, uh, who your teacher is, your network, your wealth. All of these things combined was really tough on, an 18-year-old, 19-year-old going into a space where I didn't have connections. I come from a school that was very basic, that, you know, we thought was giving us all the information. Meanwhile, I realized I didn't even know close to what I should know at 18 and 19. So that was a separate journey. I started to really educate myself. I sought after some of the best teachers in the industry, but that meant having to go back to India and to do that. Here in Canada and the US, there are teachers now that are fully versed, but it takes, I think, more networking that I didn't have at the time, or maybe the confidence. I can say now the networks are a lot more closer. I think they're a little bit more united, just because now we're also growing up and we want the same things, right? So, um, you know, coming into these spaces as a darker woman, as a bigger woman, and someone that didn't have famous parents or a famous teacher. I had a very good Kalakshetra teacher, Shanta Punnadore, but I didn't know her like normal students would know her. You know, she comes in from Toronto to Winnipeg, and we had a few weeks with her, and then she would go back home. And those were the only interactions we had. A normal guru student relationship really wasn't there. And so I really wanted that because I thought that's what I was missing. Meanwhile, I was just really missing so much more, but I was, you know, nervous because I thought I didn't have the XYZ that community was hoping that I had. So it made me started to look at my own craft. And that's when I decided that was going to be how I got in. I had to really practice. I had to, I think, re-choreographing things and making it different was such a spectacle to some that that's the reason why I got through the door. I started choreography in things that were non-religious. I refused to start performing very, very religious performances because my audience wasn't fully Hindu. And so that was a very conscious choice, but that also meant I needed to make sure my craft was 100%. You know, we have this myth that, you know, North American dancers, once they navigate away from, you know, a religious piece, a religious art piece, it's not as authentic and it's more of fusion. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be labeled as a fusion dancer because that's like I feel like that's a death sentence for North American dancers here. Once people think you're fusion, that's it. It's the end. And so I really worked hard to make sure that was my solution. But my purpose in terms of why I wanted to perform was also very important. At the same time, my academic was also taking a very important aspect of my life. I started to study human rights. Politics was something that was very close to my heart because my parents are from Sri Lanka. We fled a civil war. So that's another part of my life that I wanted to address. And I thought, why can't I bring these two things together? This meant addressing, you know, the caste system, the religious issues, the colorism, and all of that. So thinking, why can't I just perform? Why can't my art represent me? You know, we look at the historical content of what our art pieces come from, or our styles come from, but I think there's more to it. And that's when I started to learn Sanskrit and started to really understand our history a lot more than what we normally see, I think, in the context of teaching. And that became my solution. But taking that to the Western audience was a little bit more easier once I found that solution. And that's when we just said, you know, I think this is the way it's going to be for me. And this was my path at this point.
I think those are some very interesting points that you made there. We in India also are struggling with this, problem of moving away from, say, mythological stories and trying to do something which is more current, but we don't know how to navigate the
Yeah,
space and to what extent we can push the form, and questions that are essentially more performative and choreographic in nature, but they're still
right.
there. I think no matter how much of research that you do, it's still something that you'll have to try, test, and work around
Definitely.
with. There is no right answer to these questions. There's always going to be, like, 10 ways or maybe million ways of answering it, and there may be one or two ways that work out the best. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of work that's going on Instagram lately, where people are challenging the casteist notions that exist in all art
Mhm.
forms, and also talk about the politics that comes along with it. It's like a package
Right.
deal; you can't separate the two. Uh, but having talked about all of that, and there's always going to be room for more, for progress and betterment, and it's I think going to be something that we're going to continue doing for a couple of years now, and I think there's no end to it, because at the end of the day, you are going to evolve as a community, and the more you evolve, the more changes that you're going to bring to different art forms. And yes, it is important to acknowledge the fact that it's going to evolve, so that we create the room and the space for it to be accommodated in the current
Right.
scenario. It cannot be completely separate from what's happening
Hmm.
today, because otherwise it's going to lose its essence, and how it communicates and connects with the people around the
Right.
globe. um, so very important points, I think, and I completely resonate with you on those. You do talk about questions a lot, like even in the first, when you were answering your journey question, and even when you were answering this question, you talk a lot about questions, and how they have shaped and informed you for being who you are today. Can you talk a little bit about what these questions were, maybe one or two in depth, and then talk about what it is that you did as a consequence and in response to
Oh,
these
I feel
questions?
like that's like my whole. I feel like that's like my whole life.
A lot.
So some of the questions, I guess, you know, um, was it possible for me to succeed on my own? Did I have to have a famous teacher? Did I have to have a big backing? Was the color of my skin really a big deal? Was not having all the access in the world a big deal? Could I not just evolve year after year? Could that not be good enough? But could I not do that at my own pace? These were things that challenged me a lot, and it put a lot of pressure on me as I dove into an academic career and also an artistic career at the same time. And that's frowned upon, having a part-time artistic career. But as you know, I think we need to acknowledge that being an artist means you'll always be part-time. If you are full-time, it's mean you are very successful in life. You are very fortunate to have shows that sell out. You have content that sells. You have a maybe supportive partner or supportive parents that allow you to be full-time. But the reality is no one really is full time. Even those that are at the top have different revenue streams. They're never really a full time artist. And so once I started to acknowledge that and really accept that and not demonize my own, self confidence, um, I decided to look into what it meant to become a professional artist. None of these factors, these dramatic details that people were pushing on one another really mattered. These are ways to control a community. These are ways that manipulate young minds into following one way or another, not their own path. And so that was really important to me to acknowledge, that I have my own path. What and how that is meant or comes out, or how that evolves, is my problem and no one else's. As long as I didn't disrespect the art form, disrespect my teachers, those that chose to follow a very particular path, I didn't want to disrespect. But at the same time, I was my own self. I did not see myself going a very similar path as them. And I think that was a problem for a lot of people. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of friendships along the way that I created because people thought that that's where I should go. And once I broke free, I was the troublemaker because a lot of people started breaking free as well. And I think looking back on that now, all those experiences shaped me, all those, moments of, disappointment or loneliness you feel when you're sort of ditched because, people think, oh gosh, if I'm found with her, my own reputation may be affected by it and may not get the same opportunities like they would normally. Um, But then I think they also go there on their own journey and realize a little bit later, maybe not as soon as I did, or maybe differently at a different time. And, they realize sort of something similar, and now they're on their own path. And I think the biggest lesson I learned is that whether it's dance or your academic career or your personal life, everyone's got a plan. And I think we should do more to encourage each other to accept each other's journey the way we want to do it. We don't really have that in the dance world. You got to do your attaining at this time. You got to do it this way. And if you don't, it's really not authentic. You have to have this many costumes, this many people, this kind of food. And then later on, you have to have, you know, this many teachers that you've learned from, or this many performances, or you have to perform at the music academy, or else you're not a legitimate performer. And that was really hard to let go, but it was also incredibly freeing, because so eventually embracing, the idea of independence and having other friends also come out at that time really helped as well. Unfortunately, it wasn't all my friends or all my mentors or all my teachers, but it helped to have a group of people that I was surrounded with that had very similar ideas. And that led me to embrace an even more artistic side to myself, a very experimental, traditional side. And I think that is where the ideas became, where I wanted to research, what it meant to be a professional artist, getting that portfolio, getting that headshot, getting the experiences, how it shaped them and how experiences are looked at your resume, things like that sort of, you know, became a staple in my career after that. And it helped me significantly get through the door as a classical dancer. I think, in Winnipeg, being a classical dancer was normalized all of a sudden, because a lot of us were like, we want to still be considered at auditions. And then that led me to the States as well. And now, in the last few years into film, doing, some film work for Netflix recently and for theater companies here. And so it's interesting coming from a place where you're so controlled by these politics, even though there's no one physically holding you down. These bits that the community kind of does, unfortunately, really taps into a young mind, and it can be very, very hard to get out of. So ADN was born out of that, to try to question these things and to expose them for what they were, but also just to say it's okay. Like, do you? It is so important to embrace yourself, because at a young age, gaining your independence can really change you, but it also means you're starting to form your ethical, morals, and your decision making skills, and those are important for evolution of a society, evolution of a group. And so, if we don't start encouraging even the younger dancers as they come up, to encourage them to make those decisions, and so that we support them, it means that we may make the same mistakes yet again, and we still refuse to evolve if we don't encourage them. So that was a big decision for me to go on. And believe me, I've heard a lot of unfortunate noise because of it, but it comes with the territory, I'm sure.
um, Quite a lot of things that I resonate with and I completely agree with as well. But I'm definitely gonna come in here and say this to everybody who's watching. It's important to find your path, like Anita just mentioned. It's important to find what ticks you off and not go with the path that is already there.
Mm-hmm.
If you think that's the path for you, then great. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only path that exists. As artists, we're always, at the forefront of something creative. So why not assume that this path of ours is also taking us on a creative journey, and look for something that actually speaks to us more than anybody else. And it's tough because you have to, um, make it uh, as exciting for the viewer and audience as it is for you. So it's always going to be a challenge. But I think even if you take the normal regular path, particularly in Indian classical dance forms, today we are still experiencing this kind of a gap and divide between the audience members and the performers due to multiple reasons. But yes, that's exactly what it is. We are facing struggles on all fronts. Why not do something that speaks to us?
Hmm.
And I think those are some very interesting and very important points that I really wanted to talk about. But yes, I think we're at a point where I would like for you to tell us a little bit about Abhinayam Dance Network, because
Sure.
I went through the entire website, and trust me, I've been so awed by all of the work that you put up. There are a lot of festivals that you do, there's a lot of other work that you also produce. Tell us a little bit about everything that you are providing at the Abhinayam Dance Network, and also what is the inspiration behind each of it? How did you get started? Why did you start it? How is it different from what's already out there? And what is the message that you wish to send out to anybody who's interested in pursuing Indian classical dance forms, whether it's in India or outside in any other continent?
Sure. So creating Abhinayam Dance Network officially, it began in 2018. Before I was sort of doing unofficial work, and I had just also walked away from a really big commitment of 13 years of a school that I formed. And after a lot of politics and unfortunate situations, I thought, you know what, it's just really sad that there's still no solution. You try to go into ventures that you think would bring out solutions, but it isn't. You kind of need to do it yourself. So I started the Instagram page first, and the Facebook page, just to see what's out there. I've never done this. The only Instagram page I had was, you know, for my family and friends, and all this, new hashed. I had no idea what I was doing. That was 2 years ago. But my only purpose was to engage. I wanted to see if I could talk to other dancers. I wanted to see what they wanted. After a few months, I realized there was something more I needed to do. And so I finally secured space. And believe me, this was not some fancy space. It was a hole in the wall. My landlord is amazing. I've just shifted to another space, and he was really someone that guided me on business and renting out spaces. And the gist of it was to have space for anybody that wanted to use it as a dancer and for free. Creating a safe and free space is so essential for classical dancers, because rent, as you know, for a studio per hour can kill you, can really force you to decide, do I want to create something new or experiment versus something completely different, to then putting food on the table. These are choices as artists only another artist can understand. And I thought I needed to do something, that was going to change that, even if it meant it was a slow turn. So I finally opened up the website for ADN, and decided I would offer some classes. The point of offering classes was not to make money. I would only take on 20 students a year. I also offered a drop-in feature where if you were at a certain level, you can come in and get your technique back. The one thing with that, though, I started to find, especially here in the GTA, people were really nervous to leave their teachers to come and do that. That's a very big issue still, whether it's here or in India, right? It's very. Some people think that you're the teacher, and I'm like, I'm just, dancing. You want to come join me and dance? Great. If not, that's okay. And so everything was about providing accessibility. Through that, then I finally started Kelby. So Kelby was a online conference, and that's something that I will do every year or every few months, where we talk about things that plague the industry all around. So the first year was the theme about embracing technology, embracing more logical information to implement in your dance field, and then to acknowledge the cost issues. Is it right to back off? Is it right? Like, what is the right method? Is there a right method? Do we just outright call out everybody? When you have a community that has been trained for decades with their eyes and their wallets, you can't just start doing something completely different. It's an evolution of society, just is very, very slow, but there's a way of doing it. So we decided to talk about those things. And then the reason why we wanted to do the online conference was so that everyone had access to it. This year we made an access to, there was a fee for it because we provided some resources, but we wanted you to be able to access it from your computer at a low price. You don't have to fly in for these things. And also you should be able to access the speaker as well. If there's a question you have that we haven't addressed, then I think, everyone has the right to address that. So that evolved its way to the dance festival. As as a dancer, having work on your resume that has been paid for, or that's experimental and coherent, is very hard to do if you don't have the ability to perform. And so the format of the festival is very, very different. The audience and the artist actually communicate during the performance. And this is sort of an artist's, I think, advantage for me in my career. I wish I had this, so I decided to create it. It's where if I could speak to the audience to see, did you understand what I just did? Like, what did you get from this? And then I go back to the drawing board, because, I have this meme up on my Instagram page where, a dancer's experience and an audience experience, it does overlap, but to a certain point. And as we age as an artist, our experiences can overlap even more with an audience member. But that also means the evolving method of choreography has to also come out. And it means that we need to be able to trigger certain memories or feelings or emotions or situations out of an audience in order for them to understand your choreography. And so this was a festival where you could do that. So the audience is small. The dancers come, the audition, or they apply. Essentially, the first year we didn't pay anybody. Unfortunately, I wish so hard that we could pay anybody, but out of the goodness of their heart, they all came. And then this year, before the pandemic hit, we were supposed to have the second annual festival in August, but our theaters are closed for good reason, of course. So I'm hoping to get back. And that year would have been the first year I could have paid all my artists. 6 artists were to be paid, have it on their resume, have it as an exploratory moment for them as well to connect with the audience. But it also allowed for the audience who are not really from the community, half would be from the community and half would not be, for them to kind of learn. Even our own community, because they've been so trained with what looks like Krishna, what looks like Radha, what looks like Shiva, they can kind of sense the choreography and kind of get the story. But truth be told, they really don't know unless they see those little images. So I think there's a lot of education that can be done in our community. And if it means bit by bit that I go through that, doing that, I'm hoping to make a difference in that sense. So all in all, that's sort of what ADN stands for. These are opportunities I want to give dancers so that they can empower themselves how they see fit. And if there's something else that's out there, to be able to reach out to us, and see if we can kind of come up with something to help them. We have a lot of messages every day on our Instagram page. It's been amazing. And so our growth has been very slow, because I do like, create content, and then I disappear. I'm a mom. That's my first priority. So when I'm not, so exhausted, I come back and I kind of engage again. But I'm so thrilled that almost everybody that's joined the page, I've had somewhat of a conversation for. In the last 2-3 months, I haven't, because the growth has been a little bit faster, but I've always messaged and I've always wanted to see, like, why are you following this page? Is there something we can do to help each other out? Or, what are you looking for? And that's really shaped the way I wanted to do ADN and how I'm going to take it forward now.
Some very interesting points you've made there, and I think I am I follow ADN for those very reasons myself. Some very important questions that you ask on the page, and I personally feel like these are questions that everybody has had, but nobody has been putting it out there and finding solutions and answers to. So they are definitely things that we should look at. And for those of you who don't know what these questions are and who don't know what ADN is, I'm going to put up a link for the Abhinayam Dance Network in the description box, both the Instagram page and the website. Go take a look, browse through, see what all work she's been doing, and the kind of impact that she's trying to make in the world. One thing I really appreciate and I respect about you, Anita, is the fact that you are trying to find a way to bridge the gap between a performer and the audience. I think it's a very important point. It's a very important issue that even in India today we are
Hmm.
experiencing. Excuse me. And I think it's very important to highlight the necessity and the need for us to do it. Because if we don't educate them, who else
Right.
will? That becomes the very important question.
How many ways can someone interpret, sorry, your movement? It may seem, second nature to you that this is how, you get into character, or this is what a tandava means, or this is what a padam would look like. However, is that really straightforward to even people within our own community? The answer is definitely no. And so the biggest exercise you could do for yourself as an artist, dance without the music as many times as you need, videotape yourself, and really rip it apart. Go line by line, movement by movement. And I think if people can do more of that and not just rely on music, I think our choreography can be a lot more logical. Because right now we're following things that don't make sense to me in choreography. It makes sense once the music is on, and we're very lucky in terms of that. In fact, that's probably half the job in terms of a choreographer for Indian classical art form. Half the job is you get a good you know, music. And if you have it repetitive, then yeah, you can do exploratory choreography to define each line differently. But without it, what does it really mean, right? And so it's a difficult conversation to have, but it's a good exercise to do. And so if more and more of us could do it, I think we could really make it progress a bit faster.
Thank you so much for adding on to what I was saying, and it's really important to have these conversations as well. Um, so now I'm going to ask you a little bit about the artist in conversation, the thing that you've started, where
Yes.
you have different artists come on the stage and talk about it, and have a interaction with people and address some very important questions. What is it, artist in session? What is it about, and why did you start it? And what is the core value or idea behind initiating something of that sorts?
So when the pandemic hit, everybody was being invited to perform on everyone's page. I'm not sure if people were being paid, but I think later on people were starting to get paid and whatnot. But there were so many questions and so many discussions that were not being done. And it seemed really weird to me that that wasn't the first thing that we should do as a community. So artists and sessions, most people wrote off artists during the first few months of the pandemic. But the reality is, around the world, the pandemic hit us very differently. The pandemic hit people in northern part of India differently. It hit the southern part of India very differently. It hit Canada differently. It hit France differently. It hit the US very differently as well. And so I still have about 6 more podcasts to edit and to upload. Actually, I've been so busy, I haven't done that yet. So the first 4 episodes were from people around the world. Essentially me sitting with them and saying, what are you doing? How are things going on? What is a government response to you as an artist? Because I think that's important because, here in Canada, we have a subsidy, not just for artists, but for everybody under a certain income. And we were very, very fortunate to get that. My American friends were not. Some are very, very well off because they have support, or they are at the top of their industry, or they have another academic career. But then on the other end, there were artists that got one stipend of, I think it was $1,800, and that's it. And they haven't been able to work. They haven't been able to teach to gain money. And so effectively, a lot of studios closed in those first few months. Some people are reopening bit by bit now, but it's a conversation we need to talk about. What does safety mean? What does your government mean? Voting in election is so important. Who you vote in is exactly what matters in a situation like this. Who's going to stand up for you? So in that sense, I wanted to bring that artists in sessions. Artists are always going to be in sessions and they will always continue to create. But how difficult is it right now to create? How are their spirits? Are they looking forward to coming back, or have they shifted? Have they said, this is enough? I don't want to be an artist anymore. I want to go work because we have no support. And until we do, maybe we won't come back. So these are conversations that I wanted to have because I think it was very serious to have. And I decided to upload them, but these were also conversations I needed to have because I've started ADN. I wanted to know what more I could do. And so that really, the reason why I'm so behind in uploading the rest of them is because I wanted to start a few more initiatives before the new year began. And so commission work and things like that, that we reached out to different parties because we couldn't do the festival. We still have funding. And so I wanted to be able to try to use that in a manner where we could help out even a few artists, or it meant providing online resources for free that we could, help educate more artists as they're going through the transition, either outside or away from the artist world or back into the artist world, both sides to support. And so that's what Artist in Session is about.
Some very, very interesting things. I have listened to one episode so far. Unfortunately, even I've been in the middle of editing and all of that. So
Right,
I'm
right.
gonna try and make my way to the rest of the episodes soon. But some very important things that need to be discussed, and they are very context based, like you said, based on where you're living and how the pandemic has hit you.
Yeah.
And I think it's important today that we talk about this. But I wanted to ask you, how important do you think it is for dancers as a community to come together and try and support each other? Because I think that's something that we don't necessarily talk about much. But what do you think about it?
I mean, I think that's a very straightforward answer, in my opinion. I know it may not be straightforward for some, but I think you and I were on the same level where we as artists need to be more united, so that there is no conquer and divide situation happening. I think the main premise is really to encourage one another on any decisions we all make and not take it very personal. I think the South Asian community in general, whether it's here or whether it's in India or in Europe, I think have a lot of healing to do. There's been a lot of situations where I think it's penetrated our community to a point where a normal conversation can't happen without someone sizing you up for competition. And so I always advise, I'm like, connect without competing. If you can connect mindfully with another dancer without sizing them up, without trying to, ask them, who did you learn with? Did you dance here? Did you dance? These are normal conversations that most dancers have, which it shouldn't happen. You should be, hey, how are you? I'm from here. I'm from there. Are you performing today? If they're at a festival, or just a normal conversation. There doesn't need to be a sizing up of one another. I mean, the dance industry as a whole, whether it's ours or the Western world, it's very competitive. There's a lot of issues inside it, don't get me wrong. Nothing can be changed overnight, but I think we have an opportunity here now that the pandemic has hit. I think the level of respect has increased, and the level of accessibility, I think, in our art form is at an all-time high. Um, you couldn't access us, we couldn't access you, from over the seas that easily. But now, because of technology and because of the pandemic, because yeah, it's brought us together. That's right. So it's one of those things where I think it's happening organically. I think it's the more of us that can be more positive about this, and allow that healing to happen and not take things personally, um, I think we can be better off for it. And I think that would allow the future generations to embrace uh, the career of being an artist. We have a lot of work to do to create more of an industry that's more solid, because really the industry only supports like the top few. And we know who those top few have been for the last 25 years. But to be an artist of any category or to be a staged programmer or a choreographer, you don't have to perform, you could just be a choreographer. All these different avenues of being involved. Like you said earlier in the interview, we should be embracing one another in those choices as well, because without those roles, we will never evolve. We all can't just be a performer. We can, we definitely can. But I think there's other situations where I think someone's really interested in just choreography. I think someone's really interested in stage tech or costume design or different things, right? Everyone doesn't want to get into Hollywood to be an actor and actress. Some do, for sure, but some are really interested in makeup and design and really getting a character to life. So these are different motivations for everybody. And if we can motivate people to do that in our industry as well, I think we could be more solid that way, for sure.
Thank you so much for your honest answer. And I think there's a lot of material there as well for everybody to try and make sense of and consume and, sit with before reflecting. But having said that, we are definitely during the pandemic, we have definitely been in a space where we have felt the necessity and the need to support each other, and try and uplift each other during this time, because we don't know what kind of a situation the other party is going to be in. And
That's right.
it's important to sort of find it in your heart to try and extend a hand of kindness and support during this time. And thank you so much for putting it out there for all of us. um,
Of course, and you're doing the same as well. So I think it's such a good venture in that sense for everyone, getting to that positive point.
Thank you so much. So we're kind of running out of time here. So I'm going
Yes.
to ask you one final question. Although I
Sure.
think based on the kind of conversations we've had, we should definitely get back together again and try and,
Sure.
have more conversations. Uh,
Sure.
but before we end the session, is there anything particular or anything specific that you would like the audience members to think about, to reflect on, to start researching on as well? Anything that's there available for you, any information, any message?
Um, I mean, there's so many things. So I don't know, it changes for me. My dilemma and how I advocate to people out there changes daily for me. So if you see my Instagram page, you'll know, oh, she's thinking about this today, or she's thinking about that today. But in general, I hope as whether we're children, whether we're adults, or whether we're mothers or fathers or brothers or sisters and all of that, I think the root of our art form is respect. The guru and teacher sentiment is based around respect. There's a lot of flaws around it, but yet I think there was something beautiful that began from that. And that respect needs to also transcend into the parental relationships with the student and teacher, to the audience members as well, and for an artist to have realistic expectations. Going on tour isn't everything. Uh, Honing your craft is everything. Finding your purpose in terms of why you want to do this is really important, because your journey is going to change, your method is going to change in various ways, but your purpose won't. And I think it's surprising sometimes when I talk to artists, why do you want to be a performer or be in this industry? The answer generally has been, okay, it's fun, I like doing this, or it's very deep. The answers can be very deep, but most of the time it's very generic. I love to dance. I feel free on stage. But I want to urge people to dig deeper. And even the audience members, I want them to dig deeper as to why they feel that they can connect with these artists, or why they'd like to support them, or what they can do to support them, so that the artists don't have to hold back in their purpose. Sometimes I feel artists feel like they have to give fairy-like answers or fairy-like performances, because that's what the audiences expect. But I think we on both ends have a lot of work to do to come together as a proper community. When you look at Hollywood and you look at the way they've come together, the way they've struggled essentially to come past the, the romantic comedies or the comedies that are very, off point, but there's a certain trend to it. And it's almost like a very crazy conversation with an audience. And I think we need to start having that a bit more. And if we can do that, or if an artist can begin having the confidence to do that, I think the next generation of artists will have a more of an opportunity to progress this art form into a profession. Because right now it's really not a profession. It's a hobby that's looked at, even though we are getting paid, but by our own community, it's looked at as a hobby. It's not looked at as a very serious endeavor, unfortunately, even though there's a certain way we need to be, there's a certain way we need to act, there's a certain way we need to look, we're still looked at as a very supportive role rather than the main role. So if we can kind of come together on that on both ends, I think half the work will be done.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for those words and those insights. I am definitely going to think about mine as well now, although I do understand a little bit about my purpose, but I'm going to dig deeper as well, like you suggested. But I think it's important for everybody who's associated to their art form to find out their purpose, and it may not be the same as everybody else. In fact, it will definitely not be the same as everybody else, because you as a human being essentially are different, and everybody's unique in their own ways. So I think the most essential question, and a question that performers today are struggling to find answers to. Um, I think that's it. Yes. I don't have any more words to add to what you said. It's succinct enough in its own explanation. So thank you so much for all of that. Thank you, Anita, for being part of this episode, and thank you for being here with us to share your thoughts, your ideas, and your experiences throughout the field of dance. And I think it's been a great and an honor to have you here with us. The kind of information, the kind of discussions that you and I have had will definitely bear an impact in the on the way that arts is looked at across the world. We hope more people start having these conversations as well, and that more people get in touch with each other, support each other, lift each other up, and definitely connect with Abhinayam Dance Network if you are an Indian classical dancer, because you will find a lot of people who are associated with this particular company, and the kind of associations that you may develop and the relations that you may develop with these people might just take you a long way in the future. So get in touch with Anita, get in touch with Abhinayam Dance Network, expand your reach, get more information, expand your knowledge base, and learn as much as possible. All of the links will be definitely put up in the description box below for you all to explore. But thank you so much for being with us, Anita. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for tuning into Movement and Me, an initiative that is designed for budding artists across the world. To continue receiving notifications on our latest episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel Natya Mandalam, or look us up on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for more information. I'm your host Niharika, and I'll see you all next time.